What's up, guys? I hope your weekend was awesome. Mine was good, although from about lunchtime on Saturday the rest of the weekend was a complete write-off because I met up with my old McLaren colleagues for a massive all-day and most of the night session in London. It was great fun. We had just catching up on old times. It was really good laugh, but Sunday morning was a disaster. Don't expect any sympathy, but I'm just telling you how it was. I hope yours was good, whatever you were up to anyway. Right, it's Monday of course now, which means it is Ask Elvis, and I think this will be the final Ask Elvis before Christmas. Just because, well, because I'm having some time off. I'm starting to wind down, got various things on this week, got quite a busy week this week, so I'm not exactly sure how many videos I'm going to get through this week, but I will keep some coming, and then I'm going to have some time off over Christmas, come back in the new year, and get going again. So let's get this one going. Lots of questions, not as many this week, I guess understandably, because there was no race, and I guess you lot are winding down as well, but I've got some good ones, so let's get into it. So for the final time this year of 2018, roll the sting! Right, let's start with this one from Stephen Chan, who says, Elvis, from 2020 we will have 18-inch tyres. Tyres are smaller, less air in the tyre and more rim surface. Will this make the operating window of the tyres wider, thus easier to manage and keep them alive? Right, first thing, Stephen, the 18-inch rims and tyres are not coming in until 2021. The confusion, and there has been some confusion here, because the end of the current Pirelli contract runs out at the end of next season, 2019. So the tender process put the contracts out to tender for a new tyre supplier, which would take on the role from 2020 for the next 3 or 4 years or whatever it is. But the new tyre sizes and the new rim sizes don't come in until 2021. So if, for example, that tender had gone to Michelin, let's say that Michelin replaced Pirelli, they would have had to come up with a tyre based on the current tyre sizes for 1 year in 2020 before then moving over to this brand new complete change of the 2021 rule changes, which incorporate the larger rim size and lower profile tyres. So in the end, Pirelli have extended their contract, so we know that Pirelli will be the sole tyre supplier right through that period of time, but even so, the new tyre size won't come in until 2021, and it comes in, of course, alongside a bunch of other rule changes. One of the biggest ones is that there will be no tyre blankets. And so all of the upshot of all of that means that just because the rims will be larger, there'll be less air within the tyre, that is absolutely true, and the circumference of the rim will be bigger. Those things are not the things that are going to directly affect the performance of the tyre, because it's such a big change and it's a brand new tyre. Those things you're talking about in terms of the operating window and managing tyre temperatures, they are much more to do, in fact almost all to do, with the chemical compound of the way the tyre is made, and that is something we have no idea of at this stage. So Pirelli will come up with a brand new tyre for that season that has to be able to cope with a very different warm-up procedure, of course, because no tyre blankets. They will come out of the pits cold, and the driver then... Why is it every time? Honestly, I'm not joking, right? I have been sat here for 10 minutes, and for an hour before that, when we came back from the run, the dogs have been flat out asleep, nice and quiet. The moment I switch this camera on, they start barking. Every week. Anyway, yeah, the tyres are going to come out of the garages, you know, as the cars roll out, the tyres will be stone cold, just at ambient temperature. The drivers then will have a very different procedure, particularly for things like qualifying, to start, and on the warm-up lap of course for the start of the race, to start warming up those tyres in a very aggressive fashion, and they'll have to do that without overheating the surface temperature. So that's going to be something new for the drivers to get their heads around, and the teams of course will manage that in forensic style like they do with everything. But those are the things that are going to really affect the way the tyre warms up and its performance window It's the way that Pirelli will design that tyre. So it's all very different. There'll be lots of research goes into it. They will come up with a tyre and a compound, or a set of compounds, that will work and will have whatever they determine and whatever Formula One asks them to bring to the party in terms of the operating window, how wide it might be, whether there's a performance cliff as you go over that window. You know, Pirelli will be guided by Formula One and be given a mandate by Formula One to create something that in theory is good for the show, and that is all part of this 2021 rule set that actually we still don't know what's going to be in it at this point. So it's way too early to say how the tyres will perform, and just because they're of a larger internal diameter and a lower profile actually doesn't really make any difference at this stage. Andrew Harwood says, I was thinking about it when Kimi retired from the race. We haven't heard an update from Ferrari on the Ferrari mechanic Francesco Santoro, who was injured during the pit stop earlier this year. Yeah, very true. We haven't heard anything, have we? But when you sent me this, Andrew, I did make some inquiries at Ferrari, and the latest that I've got from them is that he's doing very well. He's recovering really well, very close to going back to work now. Whether he'll go back onto the race team, I don't know. I think he probably wants to, but he's got to be obviously 100% fit and capable to do his job to be able to do that. So I don't quite know where it'll end up for him, but his recovery has been long and slow, and the injuries were pretty bad. But I'm pleased to say it does look like he's making a very, very strong recovery, and eventually, at some point, hopefully, we'll be back in the pit lane. Right, Olev Matveyev. I hope I've got that right. Matveyev. Olev Matveyev. Hopefully, apologies if it's wrong. He says, what do you think about how difficult it will be for Hamilton next year? Some people start taking for granted that he'll be in the title fight next year. As I remember, the last time it was so extreme at the end of 2004 for Schumacher, and he lost in 2005. Right, well, I mean, those kind of questions, yes, we all assume Hamilton will be right at the front. We assume probably Vettel will be there as well. And, you know, we assume those things because they are two very good drivers, but they're also at the two very best teams right now. And those teams have had sustained performance, particularly Mercedes, of course, sustained performance over a long period of time where they've just been incrementally getting better and better and stronger and stronger. Next year, we do have a bit of a rule set change, don't we? So we've got this big aerodynamic change with the wings and various other things. The cars are going to look a little bit different. Those kind of changes are all an opportunity for some teams to start making improvements. Others potentially can get it wrong. We saw Red Bull get it wrong, didn't we, at the start of last year, and have to kind of backtrack on their aerodynamic platform. So it's not always a given that the best teams will do the best job, but what is generally given is that the best teams have the best opportunity because they have the biggest resource, they have the biggest funds, they have the most people, they generally have the most experienced and often the most talented people working away behind the scenes to create these cars. So what Lewis Hamilton needs, as ever, is a very, very strong car, and the chances that he'll get one from Mercedes are also very, very strong. It's very unlikely that Mercedes will get it so wrong that they will disappear all the way down the order and not be in the title fight. Don't forget, the biggest constant for next year is the fact that this hybrid power unit is still one of the biggest differentiators in the Formula One world, and the Mercedes one undoubtedly has been the strongest consistently since the rules came in, so that won't change, which means that Lewis Hamilton, as long as his aerodynamicists and designers don't completely screw it up, will be in a position probably to fight for a world title. So that's why the assumptions are made, but there's nothing to say that he will walk away with it. Ferrari came very, very close this year, so it doesn't take a huge amount for Mercedes to lose a couple of percent, and Ferrari to gain a couple of percent, and the roles could well be reversed. And of course, we still don't know what Honda might bring to the Red Bull party. So look, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion Lewis will walk away with it at all, but I think it's fair to assume he will be in that title fight at some point. Joe Latuaco says, thoughts on Lando Norris? He says, I've seen him in the garage after races working with the mechanics to pack up, and it reminded me of what you said in your book about Lewis Hamilton spending time with your crew and asking questions when he first started. Okay, well, first of all, my thoughts on Lando are that he's a very talented driver. He's definitely a great character, and I think that's going to be brilliant for the sport. You know, he didn't win the the F2 Championship this year. He was pretty convincingly beaten by George Russell, also of course going to be racing in Formula 1 next year, so the battle between those two I'm quite looking forward to. But my thoughts on the way he participates in the garage, it's very easy at the stage that he's at, and at the stage that Lewis Hamilton was at when I mentioned it in my book. So when Lewis was trying to break into Formula 1, when he was a GP2 driver as it was back then, it's very easy to be super passionate, super keen, super helpful, to kind of come along and help your mechanics out and to spend extra time in the garage, because it shows it's part of getting the job, isn't it? It's part of being extra keen. The test of Lando and anybody else in terms of their personality and the way they treat their team and that kind of thing will all just be seen over time, and it is, to be fair, it's impossible to stay at that level once you become a bit more of a superstar Formula 1 driver, because your own time demands you know, get absolutely decimated. People are wanting you for interviews and bits of filming and stuff every second of every day, so the amount of free time that a full-on race driver has compared to a test driver or a GP2 F2 driver is much different. But I still believe, and I'm a firm believer, that there are still nice guys in Formula 1, and those nice guys still can spare a moment to go and say thank you to the team, to say you know, hello when they arrive, goodbye when they leave, just the general politeness. You know, for me, that's just something that there's no reason that anybody shouldn't be able to fit into their day. So I guess over time we'll see whether Lando changes, or anybody else. We've got a few young guns coming into the sport, haven't we, this year, and it is going to be very interesting to see how Formula 1 changes those people. There are very few drivers that have come into the sport and not been changed in some way by Formula 1 and by the way Formula 1 affects their life. I imagine it must be incredibly difficult not to change, but there are still a few that stay, that keep the sort of the kind of the niceties, the politenesses, like I say, the manners, and the gratefulness and the understanding of what the team does for them. So I hope Lando, along with some of his other colleagues in the pit lane, manages to keep that side of him. Right, Jack asks this question: what would F1 teams' run plans be for testing? Is that set mileage to be completed, a certain amount of laps on a certain compound, different setup options to be used later in the year? Again, loving the videos, keep it up. Thank you very much, Jack, and thanks for the question. And look, this is going to become more relevant, isn't it, as we get into the new year and we start approaching pre-season testing. But the point of testing changes slightly at different times of the year. For pre-season, of course, it's generally all about getting the grip to grips with your new car. It's about proving its reliability. It's about signing off mileages on each individual component in that car before it can eventually go racing. And then it's about understanding where your performance is and how you can manage that performance, where your strengths, where your weaknesses are. Are there bits you need to redesign? Are there bits you can just adjust to overcome some of the challenges you might have? So that's pre-season testing, all 100% focused on getting the car ready for the first race, getting the drivers and the team all prepared, the pit stop crew, everybody ready for the first race. There's a very long list. They tend to have a checklist or a testing run plan for each day of the test, and of course that has to be adjusted each day when you've done your mileage, whether you've done more than your mileage or whether you didn't get as much done because of reliability problems, you adjust it. But there's always a plan. How long does it take the mechanics to change a certain element? And somebody will be building up a database of information as to how long it takes to change an anti-roll bar, or to change torsion springs, or adjust some ride height, and just so that when it comes into the season, the engineers have a list of exactly how long it might take to complete this particular operation. So if they're up against it, getting close to the start of qualifying, if they've got 5 minutes before qualifying, is that long enough to get a front ride height adjustment made and still get the car out? Well, he can look at his list that they compiled in testing and have that information. So there's all sorts of those kind of things as well. They'll be filming for sponsors in pre-season. There'll be pit stop practice and lots of it, and that will be testing the humans, and it will also be testing the equipment and the drivers. If you've got new drivers coming into Formula One, of which we've got a few this year, it's unlikely they'll have ever done a Formula One pit stop before. So that whole process has to be honed hundreds and hundreds of times before you ever get to that first Grand Prix, which by that point has to be second nature. Leaf Bolskiff, he says, with the new Formula E season about to start, do you think Formula 1 and Formula E will ever merge into one at some point, now that the major manufacturers are focusing on electricity? Well, this is a question we get asked a lot, and the truth is I don't know the answer to that. I've spoken quite a few times about the longer term, really longer term future of Formula 1. When there are no combustion powered vehicles left on the road, when everyone's running around with electric cars, does burning combustion powered, petrol powered cars, does burning combustible fuels, pumping emissions out into the atmosphere, does that at some point become so kind of socially unacceptable for the next generations of race fans that actually, a little bit like smoking is today almost to some extent, do people just turn their nose up at that and think that's gross? Why are people burning these fuels that are pumping horrible gases into the atmosphere? Why would you do that? Well, if that happens, if that's how the world goes in a few years' time, well then what does Formula 1 do? Is it forced to go to some kind of sustainable means of electricity? Whether they will ever merge, I don't think they will. I think Formula E has put an awful lot of work into what it is right now, into how it's... Right, you finished? I think Formula E has put a huge amount of effort and a huge amount of work very successfully into building their brand, into building Formula E into what it is right now. We're on the brink of season 5 and it's been hugely successful in my opinion and in lots of people's opinions. It still has to grow. It's nowhere near as big obviously as Formula 1. Will it ever be? I don't know. But, I think they will want to protect their brand. I'm not sure they will want to just sell it off or merge it with Formula 1. I think there may have to be a way that the two find their own little niche. Maybe it's that Formula E is always city centre street racing and that's their thing, and eventually when Formula 1, if Formula 1 ever goes fully electric or to some other sustainable means of propulsion, does that go to the more traditional racetracks and follow a format that Formula 1 follows right now, just with a different power source? I really don't know is the answer, and I'm sorry Leaf, I really can't answer your question. My gut feeling is they probably wouldn't ever merge, but we might be talking 20 years down the line, so who knows what would happen at that point. Right, let's finish off today with this one on a very similar note actually from Andre Summers, who says, what do you think about VW stopping internal combustion engine development from 2025? What does that mean for F1? And he goes on to add the hashtag Ask Elvis. So thank you very much, Andre, for that. It's a really good point, because let's say this is the start of a trend. 2025, not very far away in reality, is it? If this is the start of a trend of a major auto manufacturer stopping any development on internal combustion engines for their road cars, if, let's say, the other big manufacturers begin to follow suit, well, why on earth would they want to be involved in a Formula 1 which is all about internal combustion engine development? So yes, it could have big impacts on Formula 1, and this is where, going back to the previous question, Formula 1 now needs to decide where it's going to position itself, because if we're going to stick with internal combustion engines and go down a route where Formula 1 is purely about entertainment, no longer road relevant, it's about loud, gas-guzzling, noisy, screaming V8s or V10s, which lots of people would love to see. Well, if we're going to do that, we need to accept that the automotive manufacturers that currently fund our sport and to a large extent have run it. They have a huge say in what goes on in our sport. They put an awful lot of money into our sport. Well, they won't be around in those days because they're not going to put that money into something that doesn't give them the benefits or have the association with their core products of road cars. So at that point, do we either need to look for new investors in the sport, other industries that might be able to take benefit from being involved in Formula One, or do we say we have to stick with something that's a bit more road relevant and go further along the hybrid route and then into fully electric or hydrogen or whatever it might be, but finding a way to stay relevant to the road car industry if we want to keep them involved in the sport? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think anybody yet does, but it does feel like that could be a real turning point for Formula One, a point where Formula One has to really make a decision on where its future lies. You could argue that if the automotive manufacturers that have been a player in our sport for so long, if they decide to go off in a different direction and Formula One doesn't want to go in that direction, maybe it could be a good thing. Maybe that could be a reset point where Formula One can take control back, can take the power back from these big manufacturers and start to shape its own future under the new leadership and the guidance of Liberty Media, more so than having the manufacturers dictate the way our sport is run at the moment. So I don't know how it's going to go, but I do think that announcement from VW potentially could be the start of a trend and potentially could have far-reaching effects for the future of our sport of Formula One. All right, some good questions, guys. Thank you very much again. I will be back at some point this week to bring you something else. I don't know when it will be. I can't guarantee a schedule this week. But thank you again. Keep the questions coming over the new year. If you're sitting there, even if it's on Christmas Day, and something pops into your mind, you think, I'd like to ask Elvis that, just pop it in an email, pop it in a tweet or whatever it is in the comments section of the YouTube channel. Use hashtag Ask Elvis, and when we get beyond the new year I will start to gather them all up and we'll get another one of these done. But for now, guys, thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your day. I will see you at some point this week. Later.